Hello, everybody. Well, sadly, more terrible news, and just reminds me just how lucky I am to live somewhere where I'm safe and free, and that is the Gaza blockade carried out by the Israeli government. Means that the United Nations World Food Programme has run out of almost all comestibles in Gaza. That is part of Palestine, so they're absolutely horrendous. So aid was stopped on the 2nd of March. That's so many weeks ago, and there are about 2 million people in Gaza, about 50,000 people willfully murdered by the Israeli so-called defense force. Even Israel admits most of the people they killed were civilians. And so the World Food Program, jointly run by the United Nations, that's 193 sovereign states. Israel is one of those. Um, so Israel's obviously is lying about this, as they've lied about so much in this conflict and before. A bit like all through the 1980s, insisting no, they would never introduce nuclear weapons to the Middle East. But they already had introduced nuclear weapons to the Middle East, and they wouldn't tell the truth about that. Who here is stupid enough to trust them when they have lied and lied and lied about this again, changed their story on the things they've done in Gaza since then? So, wow, the United Nations correctly states that Israel is legally obliged to provide sufficient supplies for the Palestinians. Israel is the occupying power. Even if you say the legally occupying power, nevertheless, they're obliged to do so. This was recognized decades ago when the Allies occupied Germany at the end of the Second World War. They realized they were under a legal, never mind a moral obligation, to provide as much as they could for German civilians and indeed prisoners of war. Now, they didn't always rise to the challenge. And yeah, there were some war crimes committed by the Allies. Israelis always used this, blah, 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 your country did this against Germany, therefore we can do anything we want against Palestine. Okay, I'm not defending the war crimes that the Allies committed against Germans during and after the Second World War. And that is no justification of the Holocaust or the countless atrocities committed by the Third Reich. Israel's always trying to say that two wrongs make a right. Israel's lying again, saying that there is no paucity of food, and that it is adhering to humanitarian law. So they speak out both sides of their mouth, and then say, and by the way, we don't have to provide allow food aid through to any areas under Hamas control. Every single building is Hamas control, according to them, which is why they've blown up hospitals, clinics, schools. They've blown up, United Nations schools. And this is not the first time. Remember 2009, it was the same thing. They deliberately targeted food distribution points. They've deliberately murdered Palestinian police officers who are trying to guard the food aid to make sure it's distributed on an equitable basis and not just grabbed by the strongest. So Gaza, there's almost no wheat, no cooking oil, and so on. So wow. Anyway, the United Nations has seen at least 1,300 children in Gaza and 80 cases of severe malnutrition. So work out the percentage from that sample as it is. And no, you don't have to have no food whatsoever to die because of it. You can die of malnutrition. You've got food, just not enough or not high enough quality, or only carbohydrates and no fruit or vegetables or proteins or whatever. So they say, well, if we allow them like 2 calories a day, that's not starvation. Of course it is. So the United Nations says this, and there's obviously no more trustworthy authority on this one. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has pointed out that Gaza's almost run out of medicine, medical supplies, medical instruments, and so on. And there's so many casualties, men, women, children severely wounded by the Israeli bombardment. They can't get enough water. They can't get enough electricity. It really is hell on earth. The price of food got 1,400%. Wow. So it's terrible. It's shocking. And where is the world? Western governments are sometimes spoken out against this, saying it's intolerable. But that's crocodile tears. Cut off arms shipments to those who are committing these crimes. It's just staggering. Okay, Israeli who are hostage in Gaza, I would like them all released unconditionally, even if they're Israeli military personnel. Palestinians held by Israel, I'd like them released as well. Thousands of them are political prisoners. Some of them being convicted in some sort of a trial by the Israelis. That's not an impartial tribunal. And Israel views them as tradable assets. They're hostages in many cases. They've often been tortured or deliberately malnourished in Israeli imprisonment. right? Those to whom evil is done do evil in return. And that's true on both sides. So what if it was my child who was murdered? What if it was my best friend or something like that? I might be blinded by rage and want to hit back. I may not be able to identify the individual who committed this murder against the one I love, but even if I could find him, he might have died before I got to him. If you don't know which individual did it, you know which side did it, and say, "Oh, they're all guilty," and be furious. Okay, so I mean, I know it's easy for me to sit here in judgment because I'm not even that emotional about it, considering because it's not happening to me. No one should be starved to death. We've agreed also decades ago not to use starvation as a weapon of war, and that's what Israel is doing. And they've been public about this, about linking allowing food aid through to concessions, the release of hostages. So you're going to starve Palestinian children to death who've got no control over this. And you say, well, they're used as human shields. Well, clearly they're not, because that doesn't work, and it never has worked, and it's never made Israel hold back on murdering thousands of civilians. No, I don't think Hamas want to see the annihilation of the population of Palestine, which is what Israel's attempting. Say, but we haven't killed all of them. Well, that's true. You could go slightly further. Obviously, that's like saying that the Third Reich didn't kill every single Jew in their power. They did let a handful live, but that doesn't prove anything. Wow, wow. Okay, and I know Israel could go a bit further in this. Why they're holding back? Because there are some gallant people in Israel. They're those who are morally courageous, who fearlessly speak out for human rights. Okay, they're Jewish people, they're non-Jewish people are like that. There should be no hatred or no prejudice against people for any race, ethnicity, nationality, color. That ought to go without saying. Sadly, Netanyahu's government clearly includes people who are completely overtly anti-Arab, racist, Islamophobic, and so on. And you can see their public statements and who've advocated for crimes against humanity. And even when the Israeli authorities have allowed UN aid shipments through, sometimes Israeli civilians have stopped these and deliberately destroyed the food aid and stuff like that. And Netanyahu's prolonging this campaign to stay out of jail, to try and delay his court cases. So murdering thousands more Palestinian children just so he doesn't face justice in the courts of his own country. It's just so revolting. It's just evil beyond words. And I know there are other terrible conflicts in the Middle East. I know there's a Darfur genocide. I know what's going on in Yemen. But what's the difference? I'm not a citizen of a country which was more than complicit in what happened in Darfur, did at least speak out against it. In Yemen, I suppose, is rather remiss. The United Kingdom provided weapons to Saudi Arabia, knowing they were using them to target civilians. And that's sickening. Okay, so Israel lives in a region where there have often been some horrendous tyrannies, and Israel is not the worst. And have to give credit where it's due. They're good on gay rights or gender equality, right? They may be democratic amongst themselves, but that is really no consolation to a Palestinian whose family has just been blown up, to some Palestinians being tortured in an Israeli jail or something like that. Wow, it's very, very depressing. And because the United States, that United Nations Security Council veto, Israel gets away with it. And even when the United States voted for a ceasefire, so that was binding international law, Israel went ahead anyway. It's Netanyahu's criminal regime. There is so much cruelty and injustice in the world. I wish we could do something. I wish there was freedom for Palestine, just like Israel's free. It's very, very sad. I don't know what we can do. So count yourself lucky you have enough to eat, count your blessings.